10.
The final week of the primary campaign is underway, and the big question in many of the contests on your ballot isn't who will come out on top, but whether that person will have enough support to avoid a runoff in November. Let's get the latest on the race for governor and more from WBRZ News 2's Nick Perlin and political consultant James Hartman.
Well, with Election Day just under 1 week away, here with us is political consultant James Hartman. James was nice enough to drive all the way from Mandeville to speak with us today. So, James, obviously the election right around the corner, and from the very start, it's looked like this is Jeff Landry's race to lose. Are we still seeing that? It
is definitely General Landry's race to lose. He's followed a very similar strategy as Bobby Jindal used 16 years ago, which is, avoiding debates, getting an early endorsement, raking in the money, and just staying on course. And he's done an excellent job of that. So it's going to be extremely difficult for anybody to exceed him, not just on October 14th, but in the runoff, assuming there is one. And that's the next question I had for you. Obviously, all the polling suggests that Landry does have a big lead right now. But obviously, in Louisiana, you do need to win over 50% of the vote to win outright next week. Do we foresee a runoff election here? I would, if I had to put odds on it, yes, I would say there's going to be a runoff election between General Landry and Secretary Wilson. But every poll I've seen recently, including some I've done myself, show an extremely high number of undecided voters going into this last week, which is extraordinary. And in addition, and I know we're going to talk about this in a minute too, but early voting numbers have been far lower than predicted. So there are still a lot of variables up in the air. Could General Landry pull it off on October 14th? It's mathematically possible. Is it likely? I don't think so. And you were talking a little bit about early voting, undecided voting. What do you think people still need to see right now before they get to the polls next week? I don't know if it's that people still need to see things as much as they are finally starting to pay attention. Every candidate wants to start early, in my experience, and I always caution my clients, don't do that. People don't start paying attention until much later. Now, if people are still, I'm showing still 50% plus undecided in a lot of races right now, which is truly extraordinary as early voting has come to a close. But if people are still weighing their options at this point, that really speaks well of the electorate, I think, that they're really doing their homework and taking their time. But it also, I think, goes to the point of how several of the gubernatorial candidates who are considered strong and are considered potentially viable haven't had the resources, that is the funding, to really reach out to voters. And so voters are still a little curious, why are they seeing Sharon Hewitt, why are they seeing John Schroeder on these debate stages on television when every poll that the media is giving them shows them Landry so far ahead? So I think people are doing a little more homework now than they usually do. And you talked a little bit about early voting. Are you able to show, or tell us rather, some of those numbers that you guys are seeing right now? Well, I spoke to one registrar of voters myself on Friday, and I looked at some data from a different parish on the other side of the state just yesterday, and both of them are showing extremely low early voter turnout relative to what we're used to and relative to what we're expected. Early voting has become so popular in recent years. It's almost axiomatic that you can expect 50% of your votes to come from early voters. This year, it's not looking like that's going to happen unless we have a far lower turnout on Election Day on October 14th. And that was my next question. If early voting's low, does that kind of lead to more to a higher voter turnout on Election Day? It should. It should. Lower early voting. Early voting has been growing in popularity for decades. Every election cycle, you usually see more and more people doing it. And in this one, for some reason, we saw less. So, theoretically, yes, that should lead to higher turnout on Election Day. And let's hope the clerks of court around the state are all prepared for that deluge. It's going to be very interesting to see numbers-wise. And I'll tell you, too, what I've seen of early voting is that it's lower among African-American voters, which is also surprising and is going to be a huge, huge pivoting point for how this election turns out. With voter turnout on Election Day, who do you think that favors more? Does that favor Sean Wilson possibly forcing a runoff or Landry winning outright? Election Day turnout generally favors Republicans, but there are an infinite number of variables, and a week is an eternity in politics. Among other things, the Saints, the LSU is playing that day at home. That can have an impact. There are several fairs and festivals going on around the state that can have an impact on people turning out to vote. Now, you know, the super chronic voters like me, like you probably, we don't miss an election. You know, we're going to vote. If we have to be wheeled out of a hospital bed to do it, we're going to vote. But not everyone's like that. As a matter of fact, well over 50% of the population is not like that.
Well, thank you so much for your time. That's James Hartman here speaking with us about the upcoming election. That is on October 14th. And we at WBRZ do urge you to exercise your right and go vote. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Hartman.
My pleasure.
Still to come.